Yes, I have a question. I'm here. Actually, there's not 28 regulations there. The ruling supersedes any national law. So you have one ruling and you have one law. Now, the funny thing is that any country of the EU is a safe harbor to data of the other countries. So actually, the territory is wide enough. Nikki, you've said that according to US laws, a US corporation or the company headquarters can force the access to the data. So the solution will be more structural. I mean, tomorrow, I guess that the Googles, the Facebooks, they have their own local entities. So they could say, okay, this is the entity that will be the owner of the data. Now there's a technological component involved that the data are accessed to a technology, and usually the technology is based in the US for most of these companies. So probably they'll have to host the technology here and host the data here and not share it with the headquarters. So they'll be somehow stuck with the fact that they cannot necessarily, in the same way, split the technology to be used only in Europe. So my guess is that we'll see more and more problems. Now, in our industry, this affects, I just wanted to point something, is that, for example, when we try to do geo-targeting, geo-fencing, this is going to affect us also significantly, because what is pointed is not only the fact that the privacy authorities didn't pursue anyone and that they let things go on, so they cut the safe harbor, but the fact that actually when you see the advertising that is delivered by the US, AdWords, whatever it is, and that is following you wherever you are, it will have to be stopped. And when you Google, when you go on the internet, you see that the advertising corresponds to what you are. So it will probably transform also the industry unless there's a new regulation, but that will take years. So what's your opinion about how you think that the timeline, you think, I mean, the right to be forgotten, the day after Google started receiving 40,000 requests per day, and they changed their strategy, and they've put call centers in place. So maybe the push will be exactly the same, but I'm not sure they'll be able to solve it. It's a big structural problem that is facing. How do you see that solved over time?
So the first point, you mentioned it, that Europe is actually wide enough to, well, from my point of view, the biggest difference with what you, or the biggest replica to what you said might be the current status quo is not being covered by any regulation. It's just a directive, which is valid since, I think, 1996, where European, so the problem is that we don't have the regulation which would actually force the legislations of all the 28 countries in Europe to be one and the same. It's a directive, which means that every state, a member state of the EU, could actually implement the directive in their best will, but with still opportunity to change a few words or sentences. So we are sitting in the Czech Republic. Czech Republic is just one of the few examples with a major difference regarding the cookies directive, for example. Because 27 countries in the EU are actually forced, regarding the cookies directive, to be in an opt-out way, opt-in way, compared to Czech Republic, where there is an opt-out, which is being covered by the Czech legislation, and which actually means that in Czech Republic, you don't have to ask the users before starting using your website to confirm using of the cookies, while at the rest of the EU, you have to ask in advance. So we had a funny thing with the Google strategy, which actually recently asked all the companies which are part of their advertising network to ask their users to actually confirm the usage of cookies, which actually doesn't work in Czech Republic, because Czech companies are saying, why? Why do we have to comply with such thing? Because in Czech Republic we have an opt-out, and it's covered by the legislation, and there is no force from Europe which could be applied to that, because it's not a regulation, it's a directive. So the national law is actually above at the moment. So there are many other examples of that, and I think the only change that might actually solve the problem for the whole Europe is the regulation, which is being discussed for the 3 years, as I mentioned it. It will probably take another year before we'll finally have something which would actually... That's the problem. That's a problem.
The directive the ONP directive, for example, there was like reverse telephone search, or in the private, in the database directive as well. I mean, some countries forbid the usage of a reverse telephone search, others don't, on the exact same directive. So you won't be able to change European rules. So if there's a new regulations, they'll still have some rooms for others for every country to decide otherwise. So I'm not sure that a new regulation will solve the problem. I think the problem is more a practical problem.
Exactly, and that was the second point that I wanted to make, because your second question was, what is your expected outcome? And I think we will learn as a Europe. I think what we are trying to solve right now is not solvable by the means that we are using. And I think it will take another maybe few months before we realize that we are doing wrong for the last 2, maybe 3 years. I think we are, as a Europe, doing wrong with the Google and all the Google cases that are at the moment on the table. I think sooner or later we will realize that we are doing it wrong, because it's kind of a portal that is not wrong by its design. The problem is with the huge size of certain international, multinational companies that are actually affecting Europe and certain parts of the industry, which actually cannot be solved by saying that some parts of the IT industry are actually disallowed to be run on Europe. It's not the correct decision that we need to make, and I think we will realize that very soon. So,
saying that the competition is a bigger issue than the private.
Exactly. That's the point.
Can we jump to that for a little
Yeah,
bit on the level
break it
playing
down.
field and Google issue? Okay, if you want to make some comments on that.
Yeah, I just want to be a bit careful, because I agree that for the moment it seems that Europe is really attacking all the tech companies, and this also is linked to the Google case, the competition case, but it's also linked to the world discussion about regulation of online platforms, and we need to be careful, because Yelp is a complainant against Google, and we like Google, but if there is a problem with a specific anti-competitive behavior, then competition law, competition enforcement can take care of the specific issue. What is dangerous, and we believe that competition enforcement works, and the Google case, there are legitimate concerns among the complainants and consumer groups. When it comes to the wider discussion about online platforms and tech companies, there we need to be very careful. And then first we need to identify, is there a specific problem that we need to be solved? What kind of problem? Or are we talking about company-specific problems that can be addressed by existing legislation? And there I think that Europe needs to be careful and really define the problem before acting.
Perhaps just to echo Kostas, because I think I agree with him on all these points, that there are of course two different issues here. There is the question about the regulation that the consultation, I should better say, on the role of online platforms the Commission has been considering, which perhaps came up in relation to the Google case, but it's a totally different issue, and I think that most IT companies that at least I know would not support more regulation in a field that's actually, you need the ability to act basically and to innovate. And this is basically a competition case. And of course, as Costa said, this is not an EU against US companies here, dominant US companies. I have worked in the Microsoft case, and you could actually see that, for instance, the competition issues that arose in the context of the Microsoft case, the Commission later on considered actually adopting an interoperability directive to resolve these issues, and nobody, even the complainants themselves, actually were supporting that. So there are two different issues, and they should be clearly distinguished.